Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukrainian talk show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and I have guests today, Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here.
Always great to have you. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello to everyone. Nice to be here as well.
Yeah. Ivan, the question number one, do you have a video for us today?
Yes, of course, we can watch it right now.
Sure. Yeah, let's start it with a video.
Direct war between Russia and the West is rising. Swedish Civil Defense Minister Carl-Oskar Bolin recently openly stated that there could be a war in Sweden. His message was reinforced by the military commander-in-chief, who said all Swedes should prepare mentally for the possibility. Now, there was a backlash in the country as the statements were followed by ominous TikTok videos that told viewers war is coming. Some accuse the government of unnecessarily fueling panic, but the Swedish leadership is not alone with their assessment. Also, Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, chief of the NATO Military Committee, has warned that the West should prepare for an all-out war with Russia. The British Chief of Staff General Sanders said citizens should prepare and called to almost double the size of the army. And German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that the Russian attack might happen in the next 5 to 8 years. These statements came as NATO was preparing to launch Steadfast Defender 2024, the largest training exercise conducted in decades by all 31 member states in Sweden, which will run from February through May and will involve some 90,000 troops. All this coincided with the German government paper titled Alliance Defense 2025, which German tabloid Bild apparently had access to. Now, before we go into detail, we have to stress that this is a purely speculative paper. Not just speculative, but it plays out a very unlikely scenario. Anyway, here's the short form. In February 2024, Russia begins a new wave of mobilization, recruiting around 200,000 new personnel. This massive force helps Russia gain substantial successes on the ground in Ukraine. In July, Russia then begins cyber attacks and other forms of hybrid warfare on multiple countries in Europe, while spreading propaganda meant to victimize and incite Russian-speaking minorities in the Baltics, leading also to violent escalations. This newly created political crisis would be used to justify the deployment of at least 50,000 Russian troops in Belarus and Western Russia. Now, of course, this alarms media and politics in the rest of Europe, a sentiment which is utilized by Russia again to spread propaganda of an impending NATO attack, justifying the continuation of troop buildup in Belarus and Kaliningrad, a Russian enclave by the Baltic Sea. With all personnel and equipment prepared, the paper suggests Russia would wait until the US election to begin the second phase of its plan. Anticipating a victory by Donald Trump, causing chaos for a short while in the USA, Moscow provoked some kind of artificial border conflicts in the region at the end of 2024 to eventually repeat the 2022 invasion on NATO soil. The first objective would be to capture the so-called Suwalki Gap, which is an around 65-kilometer wide gap on the borders between Kaliningrad, Belarus, Lithuania and Poland, and the only land route that connects the Baltic states with the rest of Europe. By March 2025, under this scenario, Russia has 2 entire tank divisions, a mechanized infantry division, and a deployable division headquarters deployed outside of NATO borders with over 70,000 troops in Belarus alone. In consequence, NATO would have no other option but to approve measures for credible deterrence. On what the paper calls Day X, NATO orders the transfer of 300,000 troops to the area. 30 days later is where the scenario ends, without making any assumption as to the further outcome of this conflict. Now, like everything, just because it's not extremely likely to happen exactly like this, the ground notion is not impossible. The purpose a scenario like that serves, more than predicting the actual future, is to pose the question, let's assume if something like that really happens, are we ready? And then one can take any simple topic, like let's say ammunition, and one would have to admit, most NATO allies have significantly depleted their already small conventional military stockpiles and capabilities by donating their equipment and ammunition to Ukraine, and the industrial base is unfit to quickly replenish any of what was given out in the past years. To give an example, according to the Estonian Ministry of Defense, European countries would have to increase their production capacity by 140% just to meet Ukraine's minimum demands, not even their own. This is the direct outcome of a decades-long underinvestment in defense. 20 out of 31 allies failed to meet the so-called Defense Investment Pledge, which defines at least 2% spending of the GDP for defense, limiting the budget to 79 billion in 2023. The total deficit since 2014 amounts to more than 920 billion. Of course, one of the deciding factors for whether Russia would dare to, or is even in possession of the military capacity to enter a conflict with NATO, rests largely on the outcome of the war in Ukraine. If Russia wins, then the geostrategic borders shift radically. The Institute for the Study of War published a map showing the potential reach of Russian air defense should Moscow succeed in Ukraine. Let's also not forget that Russia has already deployed nuclear weapons to Belarus and is arming the country with ballistic missile systems such as the Iskander. Of course, events like what's happening in the Middle East or the Taiwan-China conflict are also never to be underestimated in their influence. It's a lot to digest, yes, and a lot to mull over. But if the war in Ukraine has shown us something for certain, it's that sometimes, sadly, you get attacked, and everything you have ever known can suddenly be at stake. What do you think? Should Europe prepare more for an attack by Russia, or is it an unlikely scenario? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching Talking Tactics. Hit like and subscribe, and see you next week.
Very, very thoughtful presentation.
Yeah, well done, Yeah, indeed. And sometimes you're torn apart between the fact is that within several months now, Russians cannot take over Avdiivka. And here we are talking about attacking NATO countries. However, if Russians are convinced that their stockpile of weapons is being depleted, and they cannot really do much about Russian aggression, especially as it somehow Ukrainian conflict will be resolved one way or another, then Russia, of course, can implement this plan. But what to do with Ukraine? That's the main question. Ivan, what are your thoughts on that?
The main idea is that until Ukraine is struggling Russia, they have no possibility to open the second front. Obviously, because Sasha, you're right, they can take a small Ukrainian city in the east for several months, and they're sending more and more human waves there. They're using and trying to find all possible directions to get there, using the water pipes, the water clearance systems, and seen these videos when some Russian former prisoners, which they mobilized, they're just climbing for several kilometers via those pipes to get into Ukrainian positions and trying to some way fortify there and all that stuff. So from one point, for Europe, for Western countries, it's profitable to make Ukraine struggling with Russia as long as possible, because this gives time for them to prepare, hopefully, to prepare for the upcoming conflict with Russia. From the other point, we actually can't understand, and we can't discover, while Russia is preparing and stockpiling their own weapons, and whether they will be able to open that second front and to increase the stakes and to attack the Baltic countries. And my idea is that this war should be stopped as soon as possible. This war should be stopped only on conditions when Ukraine wins and when Russia loses, because on that conditions, probably the Russian society, the Russian elites, the Russian oligarchs, they will ask questions why we lose this war. Why? What shall we do with the peaceful agreement? What shall we do with upcoming reparations to Ukraine and compensations to Ukraine, because they will be a part of this peaceful agreement, because without them no peaceful agreement with Russia is possible. They should pay for their crimes, for the destroying the security of the world, actually, and Russia should pay for that. And hopefully, when they will face this situation, then those internal processes in Russia at least will be gone. Yesterday I've heard a really interesting interview of Valery Pekar. He's one of the Ukrainian economists, and he's a professor in Kyiv-Mohyla Business School, one of the most trustable and one of the most well-known business schools in Ukraine. And he in this interview he touched the point that comparing to the Nazi Germany losing the Second World War, they had actually to at least to confess all their crimes during the Second World War, and Russians, but that was possible only because Germany was completely defeated and occupied by the Allies. They had possibility to show Germans the truth, to move, to take them to the concentration camps, to make them rebury the victims of the Nazi Germany, to show them actually the evidences. We will not have such possibility to occupy, to defeat Russia. Occupy it. It's impossible, because Russia is too big. It will be the mistake which Russia actually faced in Ukraine, because for occupying Ukraine they had pretty more resources than they've collected for this invasion, gathered for this invasion. And another way for Russians, so it will not be possible for Russians to confess, but Russians, they will face the consequences of their loss in this war. And in order to not to accept it, it will be easier for them to change their citizenship. In future, there will be no Russians. There will be Moldovians, Tatars, citizens of St. Petersburg Republic, probably, or citizens of Moscovia. And you already face it when you see that in business society, there is no Russians. There are Kazakh businessmen which got their education in Western countries. They are already changing their citizenship in business society. There is no Russian entrepreneurs, because Russians becoming toxic, and in future this will cause to more and more new countries, new republics to appear on that territory, which is now Russian Federation, because it will be not profitable for them to stay and name themselves as Russian. Russians will be condemned as a nation. Like now is not it's not popular to say that you're a former citizen of Soviet Union, or like Germans, they're not saying that they are citizens of the Third Reich. But when the Third Reich was ruling in the Europe, it was okay. It was they were proud to say that they are citizens of the empire of the Third Reich. Now Germans are not
so keen on that.
claiming it. Yeah. So that's what is coming, and as soon as Ukraine will win this war, the sooner this future will become. And in this future, it will be no business for Russia to start invasion to Europe, to destabilize the situation in the Middle East, to invade, to interfere into the elections in the United States, and do all that actually hybrid sorts of attack on the Western world they're doing right now. And I hope that the Western countries at least will understand it, and there will be no discussions whether whether give or not to give to Ukraine F-16s, or whether give or not to give to Ukraine Apache helicopters, or Taurus missiles, or Tomahawks, probably. If United States are not doesn't want to confront Russia directly, then the only way is to give Ukraine as much weapons as possible for Ukraine to win this war as quickly as possible. And this is a solution. And then let's see what will appear on the territory of Russia, and how they will confront the consequences of their loss.
Jonathan, I have a question to you with your expertise and knowledge of world history of war. Don't you think that this is the strangest war of all times? Because if you take...
Oh, it's up there, okay? It's up there as far as a really strange war. But here's the interesting part. I absolutely agree with what Ivan is saying about the necessity to first win this war, and that then once the war is won, if that he foresees a period where Russia will begin to disintegrate into various nation states by being contained. That was the original premise of the Cold War containment strategy that George Kennan formulated back in 1947. That if we contained the Soviet Union long enough, that it would eventually buckle under the stresses of its own internal contradictions. But Ivan also called to mind for me basically what Viktor Mikhailov decades ago said about the importance of Russia owning the entire former Soviet nuclear arsenal. He remarked that all peoples in the Russian Federation contributed to it, and that, in effect, that the Russian nuclear forces, it was one of the forces cementing the Federation. It basically provided a rallying point, in his view, for Russia to assert itself as a great power. Nuclear weapons are much more important to the Russian leadership than the comparable nuclear forces would be to other Western powers, including the United States. I mean, we have quite a respectable nuclear arsenal, but it's not the reason we're considered a great power. I mean, it is one of them, but we have more than one arrow in our quiver, so to speak. And so that is why I have been recommending that in previous iterations of this program, that what NATO's true long-term response should be post-war, to ensure that Russia is not only contained but eventually disintegrates, is to utilize American technology in cooperation with NATO allies to neutralize the one thing that Russia considers makes it a great power: neutralize their nuclear missile arsenal with a global ballistic missile defense system, with an upgraded space force, aided by NATO allies manning that space fleet, as the centerpiece of a global ballistic missile defense force. Once you have that in place, and you're building that in place, and you're not building more nuclear weapons, that's a complete waste of time. You neutralize the nuclear weapons that exist, and that in turn will neutralize not only Russia's nuclear arsenal, but China, North Korea, Iran. It all falls into place. Strategic stability. Go ahead.
I might disagree, a little bit disagree with you, Jonathan,
Okay,
because
sure.
this is
Sure.
a long time strategic development plan. You can't
Yes,
build
it is.
such a defense system in a year or probably in a 2 years. It's a plan for a decade, and the disintegration of Russia as an empire probably can be achieved within a couple years, and this disintegration of Russia as an empire will be also the disintegration of the nuclear arsenal, because there is sometimes United States, NATO considers it to be a great threat that the Russian nuclear arsenal will just spread, will be uncontrolled and spread across the multiple countries or multiple gangs probably, or something that will appear. But it's not true, because the disintegration of Russia will be disintegration of Russian Federation by its subjects, by the conquered states, which are parts of Russian Federation. And actually, it started in 1917 with the end of the Russian Empire, when they lost Finland, when they lost Baltic states, when they lost Poland, which were the parts of the Russian Empire. Then they, during the Second World War, Soviet Union tried to reclaim back Finland, by they were unsuccessful. During the Winter War, they successfully occupied Baltic states. They've occupied Poland by joining it to the Warsaw Bloc, and after the end of the Soviet Union in 1991, they at least lost again Baltic states, Poland, and Poland and Baltic states became the part of the NATO. And at that time, probably the leadership of the United States, of the NATO, they were also afraid of that collapse of the Soviet Union, that the Soviet nuclear arsenal and the nuclear weapons will be spread without any control. That was probably why one of the reasons why Ronald Reagan came to George Bush Sr. came to Kiev, and his famous Chicken Kiev speech, when he was begging the leadership of the Ukraine not to stay as a part of the Soviet Union, because they were afraid that the Ukrainian nuclear arsenal will be out of control. And nothing criminal happened. Ukraine started to develop as an independent country. Ukraine was managed to give up our nuclear arsenal, because the security guarantees which were given to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum were only one part of that agreement. Another part was the international recognition of the Ukraine as independent country. Another part was a financial help to Ukraine. And all those new countries which will appear on from the present Russian Empire, Russian Federation, they will face the same issues. They will give up their nuclear arsenal in exchange of financial help, because probably they will require it as well. They will require the international, the proof from the international society to join the United Nations organization and all that stuff. And it's not so scary as it seems that some, like you see in the science fiction movies or in some blockbusters, when multiple gangs of or some kind of criminal leaders just appear on the area of Russia, steal those nuclear weapons, and starting to blackmail the United States or some other country that they will issue some kind of terroristic acts, etc. It's also all bullshit. These nuclear arsenals, they will be controlled by the local elites, by the local leadership, and it will be just a case of negotiations between the Western countries and local leadership about the conditions on which they will just give their nuclear arsenals as well. And another way to we should consider that the power of Russia is and actually their possibility to continue this war is based on the oil. The oil prices, the possibility to trade oil with China, with India, with Brazil, which actually started to purchase Russian oil, is the source of all their incomes. But there is no oil rigs in Moscow. There is no oil rigs in St. Petersburg. There is no oil rigs in Voronezh or other so-called core Russian cities. All oil rigs are in Siberia, in Buryatia, which hopefully at least will become independent states, and they will be able to invest the incomes which they will achieve by trading the oil into their own infrastructure, into their own projects, to become probably the second United Arab Emirates, and at least will not spend these incomes which they will get by trading the oil to war and to destabilizing the situation in the world. They will be busy by building their own economy, by building their own states, like Ukraine was busy during the past 30 years when we get our independence from the Soviet Union. That's my main idea. So stop afraid of collapse of Russia. It's imminent. Russian Federation, Modern Russian Empire will be collapsed sooner or later.
I agree.
And for all good of us, the sooner it will collapse, it's better.
Well, I'm counting on the ability of the Ukrainians to integrate all of these various, shall we say, gifts that they are being given from various NATO allies on the United States, from in a very circuitous fashion. It's not very pretty to look at if you're into organization and a coherent, organized strategy. But then again, the Western allies did not anticipate this situation exactly. It's basically an ad hoc response to a unique situation. But they all apparently collectively recognize that defeating Russia in its Ukrainian war is paramount, and so therefore much depends upon the skill of the Ukrainian military and political leadership to integrate all of the assets that they are being given into a coherent response and deliver a decisive operational counterstrike that results in a clear, visible, unmistakable military defeat for Russian forces. And the most likely candidate for that, as I've been contending, is the severance of Russia from Crimea. Cut off the operational and logistical link. Then the Ukrainians can pivot and redistribute their forces and mount a successful counteroffensive, as they eventually will be gaining air superiority over Ukraine and over the Russian border. And once that occurs, then the defeat of the Russian forces and the Russian offensive is pretty much assured.
Excellent, Jonathan. Totally agree with you. And hopefully it will happen in very near future because Ukraine very skillfully preserved its army. It's in excellent shape. It's ready to resume its attack on Russians probably in the next couple of months. And I cannot finish the program without touching the issue of General Zaluzhny, because it's right all in the open in all the media, in Western media and not so Western media, and we cannot be just mum about with it. I think that the fact remains that Zaluzhny is extremely popular in the army and among Ukrainian people. I think that perhaps there are some disagreements about the strategy between him and Zelensky. And as we know, Zelensky is very heavily influenced by people around him, especially like people like Yermak and others. And I think right now situation is getting a little bit stabilized about this. He said that he wants to now not just dismiss Zaluzhny, but several other officials, that it's a necessary rotation of a government, and Zaluzhny just is a part of it. But I think he's backpedaling right now, and we'll see how it will develop in the near future. With that, I would like to thank you very much for today's program, and we'll see you on Friday, same place, same time. Slava Ukraini!
Героям.